If you believe Bob Mueller, the report will set you free. Read it, and you'll get the evidence. You'll know what happened. That was the essence of his plea to America yesterday as he resigned, a belief in evidence and detail and thoroughness. That is a total contrast to a president who rose to power with bursts of words and tweets, and who managed his own supporters' view of Mueller's remarks today with what you see here, a very simple piece of sloganeering. Case closed, a picture of Trump ascendant and Mueller slinking off stage. This is communication for an era where emojis and memes and pictures move people far more than paragraphs. Mueller's belief in reading the report is also a contrast to the lawyer who stood between Mueller and Trump, bridging and remixing their worlds with his own legal version of a tweet storm. The infamous summaries and letters that Mr. Barr designed not for only a legal audience or for court or Congress, but designed to drive tweets and TV chyrons and headlines to define the Mueller report, not only before it would be read, this is vital, to define the Mueller report instead of it being read. Barr got his results working on Trump's vision to dominate this buzzy world where people don't even finish articles, let alone government reports. Barr put his summary out there, which became his tweet storms and replaced for many people the report. Did that work? And is it useful at this juncture to understand how the system was worked, how Barr maybe outworked Mueller, even for those who wish Barr was not as effective as he is? Consider that as all this news was breaking, just hours after Mueller spoke, we got some historical perspective from Pulitzer-winning author Jon Meacham about how Mueller's communications tools may have been outgunned, a point we discussed.
Mueller and his team are in a knife fight, and Barr and Trump brought a gun to that knife fight. One of his main points this morning is read what we said, and fewer people do that.
Let me build on your point and hand it back to you, because you put it very well. And another way to say it is Bob Mueller brought a book to a Twitter fight. And the book...
Yes.
Now, that backdrop helps explain why a citizen who was interested enough to attend a town hall in person, which is something actually we know from data most people never do, was still surprised that the Mueller report had anything bad on Trump in it. I want to show you this brief, interesting, and honest exchange from a voter at a town hall with the lone Republican congressman to say Trump committed impeachable offenses.
I was surprised to hear there was anything negative in the Mueller report at all about President Trump. I hadn't heard that before, and I mainly listened to conservative news, and I hadn't heard anything negative about that report, and President Trump had been exonerated.
Let's get into it with the Daily Beast's Michael Tomasky, who writes in the New York Times, Mueller reiterates he wants the evidence to speak for itself, but the evidence wasn't allowed to speak for itself, as he knows. Barr spoke for it. And Jonathan Chait from New York Magazine, who's been writing about the reaction among conservatives to Mueller's approach. What do you think, Michael, of what you just saw there and how this relates to what people are really learning?
That was staggering, and not surprising, but staggering and depressing to see. But there are millions of people out there like her. Well, Ari, as you know, I mean, you quoted from my piece. Thank you for doing that. But you know, what I tried to say in that article was that Bob Mueller has this quite admirable, in many ways, in almost every way, sense of rectitude and propriety. But for these times, for the times we're in, it's a little anachronistic and it's a little old-fashioned, and it's not up to the fight. He wants to remain apolitical here. I understand why, given his history, given his sense of what constitutes his duty. And he wants to remain above the fray. But if ever there was a time in American history when the facts demanded that you be in the fray, I think it's now. So I appreciate what he's done.
Do you think Barr outworked him in public?
Well, yeah, I do, I have to say.
Let me get John on that same question.
Yeah.
I think there's little question that Bob Mueller took a very fastidious approach to this question. He decided that not only can he not charge the president because of Department of Justice policy with a crime, he can't even say, I would have charged him with a crime if not for this policy. So he's being extremely cautious, even though he laid out obviously criminal behavior in this report. And Barr took advantage of Mueller's silence and his fidelity to this principle
Exactly.
to misinform the public about
and
what
as you
Mueller
put it
did.
that way, John, that's why when Tomasky's almost being extra careful and saying, oh, well, maybe you'd have to get political. It's not political if Mueller had just noted, well, the letters tried to mislead the public about my evidence, and it's concerning when an AG does that. Full stop.
Full stop. And, Mueller has done this himself, Ari, as you well know. The letter that he wrote to the Attorney General in late April, directly right from Bob Mueller to Bill Barr, saying, you have left out the context. You know the quotes, I'm sure, better than I do. But,
let me show you both.
It's very clear, that letter.
Let me show you both something, because you guys both believe in print, right?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
I want to go through and be clear with viewers, because a lot of folks watching The Beat may be very versed on this stuff and following the story and the OLC opinions and all that, but the panel stays with me. But take a look at how newspapers around the nation are reporting right now on Mueller's new remarks. Here's the Charlotte Observer. Mueller refuses to clear Trump of obstruction. That's similar to what you've heard on television. But here's the Connecticut Post. Mueller reignites impeachment debate. Okay, that's one view. Marching towards Congress. Mueller, no exoneration for Trump in the Washington Times, a conservative paper. A little bit more of the jump ball. And then you have the San Francisco Chronicle. Take a look at this. And we're going to leave this on the screen. If you're having trouble noticing where the Mueller news is, that's because in this big California paper, I wouldn't say they're somehow doing defense for Trump, but in like many papers we surveyed tonight, it's in the very bottom, below the fold, a little squib with a little highlight we showed you there, because this was not the biggest story today in San Francisco, not by a long shot. Take a look at another local paper. Same deal, not on the front page at all. New York Times, of course, front page, but still on the right, not the far left, where Tomasky, where you'd want a big story of yours to land. What do you make, both of you, in order, starting with Michael, of the very divergent responses out there, and the worst response you can have to an important story, which is it not make the front page at all?
Yeah, well, that's the most important part, and those little squibs at the bottom of the San Francisco Chronicle and others. There's great anticipation among liberals inside the Beltway and who are, very tuned in, whose heads are inside the Beltway, wherever they may live. There's great anticipation that this is going to move the needle in a big way, Mueller speaking, and that it's going to change public opinion and it's going to change numbers on impeachment. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure how big a story this is out there across the country. I'd like it to be. I'd like to think it would be. But again, and I trace this back to Mueller's reticence to just say what he means and speak more directly about what he's putting out there.
I noticed that people like us who follow this very closely were not surprised by what Mueller said. But conservatives, not just like that woman at the town hall that you showed, but professional pundits seem to be shocked and outraged by Mueller's comments, because I think they actually believed Barr's spin and were stunned when Mueller contradicted it, even though everything he said was in the report.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is that even the people you'd think are supposed to do the reading are not, and Mueller may have been speaking to them as well, Jonathan.
Right. I mean, I really don't think many people on the conservative side actually dug into the Mueller report itself, which is why Justin Amash was so unusual, not only in his conclusion, but I think in the method he took to get there, which is read the report.
Final thought, Michael?
My final thought is that, if the Democrats want to pursue impeachment hearings, pursue an inquiry, they need to do more of the work to massage public opinion. They're not going to get any more out of Robert Mueller. They're not going to get any more out of him. He may go testify, maybe, but he's made it pretty clear what would the point be. So the ball is completely in the Democrats' court right now.
Yeah, and the larger point here that is where the Constitution meets the public discussion is this isn't the first communications revolution we've lived through. It probably won't be the last. As soon as you get out to what's the Congress going to do, you're talking about a jury that has constituents. And so at a certain point, Mr. Barr and I think the Trump White House were very prepared to try to work the constituents about all this. And that was something that Ken Starr and other prosecutors have also thought about. Archibald Cox held a big press conference at one of the key inflection points when he was warring over the Nixon tapes. In other words, other prosecutors have seen that larger role precisely because you don't indict the president. Mr. Mueller has a narrower view and in that sense ceded a lot of the communications ground. I think that's clear. Michael Tomasky and John Chait, thanks to both of you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.